to the Prophecy Club. Let me ask you a question. Now think for just a minute before you answer this. Do you think it is possible that there is a group of people so evil that they want to kill off millions of people, maybe even kill them off as fast as possible, maybe even kill them off before they have a chance to repent and receive Jesus? Could it be that people in high places are using everything they can possibly do to still get away with it, of course, but to kill you, to kill masses of Americans? Could that be? We had Dr. Stan Monteith come in, and he spoke to us, and we entitled the DVD, and it's an awesome DVD, called Planned Population Reduction. We get so many compliments on this DVD. People absolutely love it. He exposes the dangers of Vioxx, artificial fertilizers, pesticides, injections, immunizations, vaccinations, genetically altered seeds, cell phones, diet drinks, soy products, mercury preservatives, MSG, aspartame, fluoridated water, suppressed cures, chemtrails, anthrax, cancer treatments, DDT, created diseases, milk additives, processes, MTBE, Splenda, and that is just scratching the surface. Planned population reduction. Could it be possible that people actually want to kill you? Dr. Stan Monteith.
I want to tell you a story. It was written about 2,350 years ago, about 350 some years before Christ was born in Bethlehem. It was written by a Greek philosopher, and it was an allegory. It was the story of a group of men and women who'd been taken captive and been taken into a gigantic cavern where they were kept for many years, and they were kept in chains so that their faces were towards the wall of the cave, and in the center of the cave they burned in eternal fire. The people were fixed so that all they could do was look at the wall of the cave and the shadows that were projected on the wall of the cave from the eternal fire. Now, at times, their captors, to amuse themselves, would project shadows on the wall of the cave. They might take the bust of a man or the face of a man and a statue and project it on the wall of the cave, and that would be the people's reality. At times there were humorous figures. At times there were frightening shadows. And all that they knew for the many years that they remained in the cavern are simply those dancing shadows projected upon the wall of the cave, and that became their reality. And then one day, one of their members broke loose from his chains, and he went outside and he saw truth. He saw the sun and the stars, the trees, and he came back into the cavern and broke his fellow captives free from their chains. And as they left the cavern, though, they approached, and the light blinded their eyes, and they turned back. Because you see, for so long, their reality had simply been dancing shadows projected upon the wall of the cave. And the question arises, could we be victims of something similar to what Plato wrote about? The story I've told you comes from Plato's Republic, and it's known as the parable of the cave. And I would like to suggest that perhaps, in many respects, we are victims of the same sort of situation. We really don't understand what is truly going on in the world today. It was 76 years ago when a man named Edward Bernays, and Edward Bernays was Sigmund Freud's nephew, and he was the master propagandist. And he wrote a book. It is still available. It's called Propaganda. And he opens with these words: "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of." I'm going to repeat that again because it's the very essence of what I hope to teach you today. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power in our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. Could that be true? Well, Edward Bernays played an important part in creating the world we live in today. During the First World War, he was organized by something known as the U.S. Committee on Public Information that was able to convince the American people that we should go to war. And you remember all those wonderful slogans we had during the First World War? A war to make the world safe for democracy. Well, what does that remind you of today? The war to end all wars. Wouldn't it be wonderful, perhaps even to give your life fighting the war to end all wars? And because a small group of people controlled the media in those days, and those of you who have never seen our video, The Secrets of the Illuminati, ought to get that because we go into the background of the degree of control that existed at that time, and they have that video in the back. We know that J.P. Morgan and his associates really bought up the majority of the major outlets, media outlets in America, to convince the American people we had to go to war. And the man who coordinated this whole movement was Edward Bernays. After the war, First World War, why, of course, he was hired by the American Tobacco Company. Now, when I went to medical school in the late 1940s, cancer of the lung in women was very uncommon. Cancer of the lung in men was common because, of course, men smoked, but women did not smoke. And Edward Bernays was hired by the American Tobacco Company, and lucky strike, convinced women they should smoke. They came up with all sorts of wonderful little gimmicks. One of them was reach for a smoke instead of a sweet. Isn't that sort of something you can remember? And, well, they succeeded. They were able to use the media to convince women they should smoke. And Edward Bernays succeeded wonderfully. Today, among women, the second most common cancer is cancer of the lung. And hundreds of thousands of women, if not millions of women, have or will die because of the success of Edward Bernays, who told us we are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes suggested, our ideas formed largely by men we have never heard of. In 1950, the U.S. Public Health Service hired Edward Bernays to sell the American people on water fluoridation, the promise of a perfect smile for children throughout all eternity. And what they were able to do was to turn an industrial poison into a panacea, and we'll talk more about water fluoridation later in this program. But it was a wonderful idea, and they were able to convince the doctors and the dentists and the American people that water fluoridation was the panacea that was going to lead us all to perfect teeth throughout our entire lives. He was hired by the United Fruit Company and the CIA to convince the American people that the Guatemalan Revolution was the most normal thing in the world. He worked for General Electric, he worked for Procter & Gamble, and he molded the ideas of the American people throughout the 90 years that he was here. Now we are told that the American people are among the healthiest in the world. And we are certainly living longer than we did in past generations, but today there's an increase in allergies among our people. There's an increase in Alzheimer's disease. There's an increase in antibiotic resistance. There's an increase in asthma and autism. 1 in every 6 children in America has either a neurodevelopmental abnormality or a behavioral abnormality. At one time, the incidence of autism was 1 in 10,000. Now it's about 1 in 166 American children. Why is that happening? We find an increasing number of autoimmune diseases of all different sorts. There's an increase in cancer and in diabetes and in heart disease and in neurodegenerative diseases and Parkinson's disease. There's an increased obesity, and you've heard about the obesity epidemic, and how often do you watch television? They tell you about the obesity epidemic, and what you need is more in the way of exercise. That's going to solve your problem. And then there are the deadly new diseases, like AIDS and like chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. These didn't exist when I went to medical school. There's a decreased fertility among our men. In fact, the sperm count in American men has fallen to about half of what it was a generation ago. And then we see Ebola and Lyme disease, and we see SARS and Nipah, which is another epidemic. And now we find about the avian flu epidemic that is threatening to annihilate us. And night after night, week after week, on television, in the newspapers, on radio, we see articles about the avian flu pandemic, which it's not may occur, but it's going to occur. It's only a matter of time. And you know that 55 people have died in the last 2.5 to 3 years of this disease. It's going to annihilate us all. And 55, I think the last count was 58 people have died. Did you ever have a thought in your mind that perhaps your minds were being molded, your tastes suggested, your ideas formed by people you really didn't know? Well, San Jose Mercury News reported on the 5th of October of last year, page A1. The title of the article was Immigrant Youth's Health Deteriorates in U.S. Study Finds. And this is what it says. It's talking about foreign children coming to the United States. When they arrive, children of immigrants have lower rates of asthma and obesity than American-born children. Children born to immigrant mothers are also less likely to have low birth weights or die as an infant than children born to native-born mothers. When they arrive, children of immigrants have lower rates of asthma and obesity than American-born children, and children born to immigrant mothers also are less likely to have low birth weights or die as an infant than children born to native-born mothers. Why would that be? Aren't we supposed to be healthier than these people from underdeveloped countries that don't have all the advantages that we have here? Or is it perhaps that we don't really see what's going on? U.S. high school graduates, when they are finish their high school and they are tested competitively with the high school graduates of other countries, are among the lowest in mathematics and in so many of the things that are tested for. I mean, we're down with Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia. Why is it that with all the money we spend on education, we're doing such a poor job? I don't know how many of you watch Jay Leno. He is vulgar and crude, but he does have some interesting programs where he interviews people on the street. I mean, many of them don't even know who's buried in Grant's tomb. I mean, it is the most incredible thing as you see this whole story unfolding. In fact, he told a story the other evening. He said there was recently a poll in Mexico, and they polled the Mexicans, and 60% of them said they wanted to come to the United States, and the other 40% are already here.
We'll be right back after this message. Some of you know that each Hebrew letter represents a number, a picture, sound, and color. But probably what you don't know is it also contains a code which finally unseals the prophecies of Daniel. In his new Prophecy Club DVD, Hebrew, the Rainbow Language, David Matthews will show you how to use the code to finally unseal Daniel and the rest of the Bible. Prophet Stephen Hansen has given over 1,200 amazing national prophecies, and in his new DVD, Divisions Leading to the Internal Revolution, either by vision or audible voice, Steve tells you what God has shown him about fires in New York City, the invasion of America, the new Madrid fault line, Texas separated and parts are underwater, and what will happen in 2013. Each DVD valued at $30, get both for a gift of just $45. Order at 785-266-1112 or prophecyclub.com. And now, back to the program.
And 60% of them said they wanted to come to the United States, and the other 40% are already here. But be that as it may, Elie Wiesel was taken from his home when he was 18 years old and sent to a Nazi concentration camp. He survived that period of time by taking his fellow countrymen, taking the gold out of their teeth and all the things that they did after they'd been killed. But he wrote this in a book called One Generation After, 1970. Spring 1945. Emerging from the nightmare, the world discovers the camps, the death factories, the senseless horror, the debasement, the absolute reign of evil. Victory tastes as ashes. There was then a technique, a science of murder, complete with specialized laboratories, business meetings, and progress charts. Those engaged in its practice did not belong to a gutter society of misfits, nor could they be dismissed as just a collection of rabble. Many held degrees in philosophy, sociology, biology, general medicine, psychiatry, and the fine arts. There were lawyers among them, and unthinkable but true, theologians and aristocrats. Now, why would intelligent, educated people participate in something like the Holocaust? With these idea of specialized laboratories and business meetings and progress charts? Could such a thing happen today? Could it really be that there are people who are charting a mass genocide throughout the world today? Let me suggest to you that the U.S. Census Bureau is charting the progress of the AIDS epidemic throughout the world. I'm on all the mailing lists, and I get regularly about every year from the U.S. Census Bureau the latest figures on what a great job is being done in controlling the AIDS epidemic throughout the world, or monitoring a genocidal epidemic, which is designed to kill blacks and non-whites throughout the world today. Well, you have to understand Nazism to understand what's really going on in the world today. Rudolf Hess said it best. He said, Nazism is nothing but applied biology. National Socialism is nothing more than applied biology. Because you see, if you don't believe there's a God, why shouldn't mankind simply try to make a better world? Of course, you're going to have to get rid of certain people. So in the process of that, the Nazis sterilized some 700,000 mentally handicapped people. They killed 100,000 disabled people. They killed off, of course, the gypsies. They exterminated 6 million Jews. And they murdered about 12 million others, most of whom were Christians, because at that time, of course, Europe was predominantly Christian. Europe is no longer Christian. Because, of course, the people there had believed their ministers who told them that they would be whisked away in a cloud in the rapture before anything bad happened. And, of course, it really wasn't true. It was a lie. And it really has turned the people of Germany against religion. And you can go, if you want to meditate, you can go to the churches in England today because there's nobody there to interrupt you. And in southern France, there are far more mosques than there are Christian churches. Well, if these things are really taking place, then somebody has to be controlling what the American people think. So the question is, who controls the media? Well, there's a wonderful book. It's called The New Media Monopoly. It's written by a man named Ben Bekdakian. He's a left-wing professor from the University of California in Berkeley, where I graduated many years ago. And Ben Bekdakian began studying the control of the media back in 1983, where there were 50 corporations that dominated the American media. In the last edition of his book, published in 2004, called The New Media Monopoly, he points out that 5 mega corporations dominate our media: Bertelsmann, Disney, Fox, Viacom, and Time Warner. And several of those are not even owned by people who are primarily American. But little has changed. John Swinton lived from 1830 until 1901. He was the editorial page editor of the New York Times from 1860 to 1870. He was the editorial page writer and chief of staff of the New York Sun after that, and in 1883 he gave a talk before something known as the Twilight Club in New York City, and that was on April 12, 1883. And we have the original source if you want to check these quotations, so to be sure they're right, because I hope you will challenge everything we say. I hope you can prove me wrong. And this is what he wrote, or this is what he said, and this is what is recorded in a book that came out in 1960, published by St. Martin's Press. In 1883, he said this: "There is no such thing in America as an independent press, unless it is in the country towns. You know it, and I know it. There's not one of you who dares to write his honest opinions, and if you did, you know beforehand they would never appear in print. I am paid $150 a week for keeping my honest opinions out of the paper I'm connected with. Others of you are paid similar salaries for doing similar things. If I should permit honest opinions to be printed in one issue of my paper, like Othello, before 24 hours, my occupation would be gone." That comes from great quotations by George Seldes, Caesar Stewart, and that's Lynn Stewart of New York. That's St. Martin's Press. Now, 110 years later, Richard Harwood, who had been the editorial page editor of the Washington Post, and of course he had retired in 1883, so he's writing now in October of 1993, 110 years after Swinton had actually written his story. And Richard Harwood was writing about the control of the American government and the American media by the Council on Foreign Relations. And this is what he wrote. Speaking of the Council on Foreign Relations, the President is a member, so is his Secretary of State, the Deputy Secretary of State, all 5 of the undersecretaries, several of the assistant secretaries, and the department's legal advisor. The President's National Security Advisor and his deputy are members. The Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, like all previous directors, and the Chairman of the Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board are members. The Secretary of Defense, 3 undersecretaries, and at least 4 assistant secretaries are members. The Secretaries of the Departments of Housing and Urban Development, Interior, Health and Human Services, and the Chief White House Public Relations man, David Gergen, are also members, along with the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader of the Senate. In the past 15 years, council directors have included Hedley Donovan of Time Incorporated, Elizabeth Drew of The New Yorker, Philip Galen of Washington Post, Karen Elliott House of The Wall Street Journal, and Strobe Talbot of Time Magazine. The editorial page editor, the deputy editorial page editor, the executive editor, the managing editor, the foreign editor, the national affairs editor, the business and financial editor, and various writers as well as Catherine Graham, the paper's principal owner, represent the Washington Post in the council's membership. And we've given you the reference to that, and if any of you want to get a copy of it, article, we have it. Needless to say, it was not put on the front page of the Washington Post. I'm surprised it was even published there, but it was back on page 21 where most people would never see it. You see, we really don't have a two-party system. We have a one-party system because the people who control the Republican Party come from the CFR, the people who control the Democratic Party come from the CFR, and if you watch my video, which we have in the back there, The Secrets of the Illuminati, why you'll find out that these people control both political parties and they are a front for another secret group that is dedicated to a one-world government and a new world religion. Now, President Wilson was also well aware of this. He wrote a book in 1913 titled The New Freedom. This was Woodrow Wilson, and this is what he wrote. Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided in me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States in commerce and manufacture are afraid of somebody. They are afraid of something. They know there is a power somewhere, so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they'd better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. Now, we have the book, and I think this is such an important quotation because Woodrow Wilson recognized this force. He did not realize that he himself was controlled by the force as he was writing these words. Because you see, these people always have their people surrounding the people who control our government. Just as George Bush today is controlled by other people like Karl Rove and Dick Cheney, who comes from the Council on Foreign Relations, so it was that Woodrow Wilson was controlled by a man named Edward Mandell House, Colonel House. In fact, President Roosevelt, and when I went through Colonel House's papers at the Sterling Library at Yale back in 1980, I came across this letter, and we have copies of it if any of you would like to see them. Writing to Colonel House, who also controlled President Roosevelt. He controlled Woodrow Wilson. He controlled Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And Roosevelt was writing to Colonel House on November 21st, 1933, and this is what he wrote. The real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, that a financial element in the larger centers has owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson. You see, President Roosevelt really didn't understand what this was all about any more than Woodrow Wilson understood what it was about, but they knew that there was a force there, a force somewhere, someplace so powerful, so complete, so pervasive, so watchful that most people were afraid to even mention it, speak of it above their breath when they spoke in condemnation of it. President Nixon, after he was forced out of the White House, wrote a book called The Real War. And you'll find on page 238 of that book, published in 1980, this statement. The nation's immediate problem is that while the common man fights America's wars, the intellectual elite sets its agenda. Today, whether the West lives or dies is in the hands of the new power elite. Those who set the terms of public debate, who manipulate the symbols, who decide whether the nation or leaders will be depicted on 100 million television sets as good or bad. This power elite sets the limits of the possible for the president and Congress. It molds the impression that moved the nation or that admire it. Sort of sound like Edward Bernays, doesn't it? Writing back in 1929. And President Roosevelt recognized this, and certainly President Nixon recognized it, but none of them really understood what I'm going to tell you today. Are we being told the truth? Does the media control our reality? Do we believe what we see, those dancing shadows on the wall of the cave? Or is there another reality that we are totally unaware of? Well, most people believe that the United States went into World War II because Adolf Hitler was an evil man and he wanted to rule the world. Well, there's no question that Adolf Hitler was an evil man, but did you ever wonder how it was that Adolf Hitler could come to power in 1933? And by 1938, he was challenging the entire world at that time? I mean, where did he get his gasoline? Germany doesn't have any gasoline. Where did he get the rubber? They didn't have any rubber. Where did they get the material to build up their military? Where did they get the finances to build up the military? They were a bankrupt nation when he came to power. Well, there are a number of books that cover this. You're not going to find them in your local library. Charles Hingham, Trading with the Enemy, 1932 to 1949. Did you realize that all during the Second World War, when our boys were dying on the beaches of Normandy and in the forests of France and Germany, that American industrialists were financing and helping and Adolf Hitler and helping him to get his war material? Certainly, I found, when I went through Colonel House's papers at Yale University, a letter that was written by Ambassador Dodd to Colonel House. And this letter was written in 1936. And in that letter, Ambassador Dodd is asking Colonel House, why are American corporations building up the Nazi war machine? I mean, here's 1936. We just got through with the First World War. Nobody wants another war. There are 100 American corporations here in Germany that are building up the Nazi war machine, and they can't get any money out of the country. They're exchange controlled, so there's no money to be made by building up the Nazi war machine. Why is this happening? Do the American people know what's happening? And I suspect Ambassador Dodd really didn't understand. I'm sure Colonel House did understand, but...
Time has run out, but I want to say thank you for listening, and thank you for your prayers and your gifts of support. God bless. Now from the Prophecy Club, some exciting opportunities for you. The February gift offer is Angels at Work. Prophet Leslie tells of many examples in her life in which the Lord set forth his angels to bring back lost items, keep her loved ones out of harm's way, and comforted her in difficult times and directed her footsteps. You will learn how to call on ministering spirits in time of need, be uplifted, encouraged, and build your faith. In True or False Prophecies, also by Prophet Leslie, she helps you to recognize the lies and false information that can lead you away from the truth. Topics are: recognize a true or false prophecy or prophet, receive the best blessings, receive a double blessing, recognize the anointing for the spirit of prophecy. Then, Will You Survive America's Fall by Doug Metzger is talking about how he had a very radical salvation and God began to immediately give him visions. He shares 16 visions of America's future, and he was shown how unspeakable torment is coming to America to turn us back to God. Topics are: America the Fallen Tree, vision of how the church was formed, vision of a nuclear missile, 12 cities destroyed, 1 million voices screaming, 2 explosions, 10-to-1 inflation, dollar becomes worthless, the begging woman and the turnstile, the great betrayal, only prayer is protection, and the greatest horror and revival at the same time. Angels at Work, $20. True or False Prophecies, $30. Will You Survive America's Fall, $30. 3 DVDs valued at $80 for a gift of just $45. It's the February gift offer, available at prophecyclub.com or calling 785-266-1112. Some of you know that each Hebrew letter represents a number, a picture, sound, and color. But probably what you don't know is it also contains a code which finally unseals the prophecies of Daniel. In his new Prophecy Club DVD, Hebrew, the Rainbow Language, David Matthews will show you how to use the code to finally unseal Daniel and the rest of the Bible. Prophet Stephen Hansen has given over 1,200 amazing national prophecies, and in his new DVD, Divisions Leading to the Internal Revolution, either by vision or audible voice, Steve tells you what God has shown him about fires in New York City, the invasion of America, the new Madrid fault line, Texas separated and parts are underwater, and what will happen in 2013. Each DVD valued at $30, get both for a gift of just $45. Order at 785-266-1112 or prophecyclub.com.